Okay, good evening, welcome to Parsha Shiur. Parsha's Seitzei is bumper packed of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. A whopping 74 mitzvahs appear in this week's Parsha. Just an overview of some of the Parsha and some of the mitzvahs that are referred to. The Parsha begins with Yefas Toya, this very enigmatic captive woman of war. Then you have the inheritance for the Bechor, the story of the Ben Sora Amora, the Hashavas Aveda returning lost items, the famous case of Kan Tzipor, shooing away the mother birds, Ma'akeh, the obligation to build a fence, Kilaim, different forms of Kilaim, of sort of cross breeding or cross growing various crops, not marrying Amoin or Moav or a Mamza, paying workers on time, the prohibitions of ribis, of interest, the obligation of yibum, and then the parsha ends with Amalek. So it's a very full parsha. So let's go through a few very interesting ideas. Just one very short opener. We mentioned the inheritance for the Bechor. So if you take a look at paragraph 2, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com, and then Blined, I'll send you the handout. The parsha says, Ki es ha-Bechor. We're talking about the inheritance for the Bechor. The pasuk says, Ki es ha-Bechor yakir loses lo pishnayim. The Bechor gets double portion. So there's a very, it's a well-known idea, but it's found in the writings of the Vilna Gaon, quoted in his name. And I saw it in the Mayona Shel Torah, a well-known parsha sort of collection of different ideas. And he says the following: Ma'inyan hadava she'oisius Bechor, the very word Bechor is merames, hints, alludes to the fact that he gets pishnayim. Why? Because the very word is sort of hints of this. Shabachar is like alecheli pishnayim beyursav. Shekein kol ois bebechor minyona kafum minyon ha'is shelefaneho. The three letters of the word Bechor, beis chof reish, are unique in that each of these three letters alone are double the previous letter. So beis, gematria 2, is double the letter before, it's aleph. Chof is gematria 20, which is double the letter before it, yud. And reish is double the letter before it, which is kuf. And that's unique to those three letters, because think of all the other letters. Vav is not double hey, etc., etc. So you see that inherent in the very name Bechor is the concept of pishnayim, of twice. And the truth is that the letters of beis and chof and reish, the combination always describes sort of bounty and sort of abundance. So, for example, the word brecha, a brecha is like a pool or bracha. Well, what is a bracha? A bracha is just overflowing bounty. That's what a gift is. A blessing is just giving without limit. And a brecha is like an overflowing spring. So the very words themselves allude to this concept, and therefore inherent in the word Bechor, loses pishnayim, the actual word itself alludes to this concept that he'll get the double portion. Okay, let's turn on to the Ben Sora Amora. This is a famous episode in this week's Parsha, and I came across something fantastic in Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein's Sefer, a very interesting Chasm Sefer. But let's work through it. The Pesukim read as follows. This is paragraph 3. Ki yiyeh le'ish ben soire umoire. Parents have a rebellious child. Einenu shomeh b'kol aviv u'v'kol imay. He's not listening to the voice of his mother, the voice of his father. V'yisru oisei v'lo yishma aleihem. And they warn him, and he's not listening. V'sofsu by aviv v'imay. The parents take him. V'yitziu oisei al ziknei iroi v'al sharam yikoimay. They take him to the Beis Din. V'omru al ziknei iroi. B'neinu zeh soire umayra. This child is rebellious. Einenu shomeh b'kolenu. He is not listening to our voice. Zoilel v'sovea. He's a glutton and he's indulgent. Urgamu kol anshe iroi. And then the Beis Din will stone him, ba'avonim, umeis, and he dies. Ubi'ar mikibrecha v'chol Yisrael yishmu v'yiro. Those are the Pesukim dealing with Ben Soire Umayra. Now, there is a famous Gemara. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, the parak is, I think, called Ben Soire Umayra. The Gemara says as follows: Omer Reb Shimon, v'chi mipnei she'ochel zeh tartei mebaso v'shosa chatzi lug yayin ha'etalki. Because this young man ate a large quantity of meat and drank a large quantity of wine, the poor kid is going to be chayiv skila. It seems very strange. But says Reb Shimon, it never happened and it never will happen. So why is there a whole parsha in this week's Seder in Parshas Seitzei of the Ben Soira Meira? Loma nichtav d'roish v'kabel schar. It's there that we can expound on this mitzvah and we'll get rewards for expounding on a theoretical mitzvah, but something which never was put in practice. Continues the Gemara. Omer Rabbi Yonason, there are different girses. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Ani ro'isiv. He says, what are you talking about? I saw a Ben Soira Meira, v'yoshavti al kivra, and I've sat on his kever. So don't tell me that it's all theoretical, because it actually happened. Ad kan the Gemara. Now this Gemara it needs an explanation. First of all, according to Rav Shimon, that he says that this child ate a lot of meat, drank a lot of wine, and for that you stone him. He says lehoy v'lo nivra, it never happened. So why is it written drosh v'kabel schar? Drosh v'kabel schar is a very enigmatic concept. First of all, if the whole concept of drosh v'kabel schar is just good to darshan and you'll get schar for it, then why don't we expound on a mitzvah which does have practical application? Why expound on something which is purely theoretical? If the reward is in the darshaning and the talking about it, then darshan about something which has practical application. Number one. And number two, what is the point? What is the point of giving us a mitzvah which has no practical application, according to Reb Shimon, which exists only for the purpose of exposition? It seems a strange concept. What does that mean, drosh v'kabel schar? Why? That's number one. And second of all, what type of machlikas is this anyway in the Gemara? Reb Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan, that it did happen, it didn't happen. It either happened or it didn't happen. They can't both be right, surely. So it's a very strange type of machlikas. What is going on? The Rabbeinu Bachai, famous Rishon, on the Parsha, in this week's Parsha, he says, quoting this Gemara in Sanhedrin, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Ani yoshavti al kivra shel ben Soira Meira, I sat on the kever of a ben Soira Meira, ef shaloima t'palig abraisa. You could say that they're arguing. Oishema hod Rabbi Yochanan lo hay ben Soira Meira gomor. Or perhaps they're not arguing, and really what Rabbi Yochanan said when he sat on the kever of ben Soira Meira, it wasn't really a proper ben Soira Meira. Aval lo hay ben Soira Meira gomor kedinter shenigma l'skila. So they were not really arguing. What does that mean? What is pshat in the Rabbeinu Bachai? So the Chasam Sofer explains this Rabbeinu Bachai, and he says something very, very interesting. He starts off by quoting the famous Rashi. Says Rashi, and I've quoted at the bottom there, O ben Soira Omeira ne'harag al shem Sofer. What is the whole concept of a ben Soira Omeira? That he is killed not because of his current actions, because his current actions, although they may not be so refined, he's eating a huge amount of meat and drinking a lot of wine, but he's judged, his nerag al shem sofer. What does that mean? Higia Torah l'sof daitei. The Torah descends to the end of this young man. Sof shemachal mom and oviv, because he's got to feed his habit somehow, and therefore he'll dissipate his parents' money, and he needs to feed his habit, and he hasn't got any money to feed the habit. And therefore he'll stand on the highway, he'll need to steal and to rob people to get some money. Better this young man dies innocent than dies chayav. That's the famous Rashi. Now on that, the Chasam Sofer says the following, turning over the page. But Rabbeinu Bachai quotes Rabbeinu Bachai, i.e. that perhaps they're not arguing. What does that mean? Says the Chasam Sofer, V'ha'inyan b'zeh, ilu hoy ben Soira Meira nerag. Imagine, if the ben Soira Meira were to be killed, you've got a young boy, he's 13 years old. Hayakol he'jotis merananim, all simpletons, simple people, would start murmuring, Uma'arim al mishpatei Hashem, and saying, that's not fair. He's a kid. He's in year 8. he's a 13-year-old. What did this young man do? He liked shawarma. I know a lot of boys. Okay, I teach older boys, but I know a lot of kids. They also like meat. right? Sometimes it's like there's a badge of pride that I'm fleishik. It's like an embarrassment. You're milchik? Oh, I'm so sorry. Right? And that's English boys who keep 3 hours, not 6 hours. So what did this poor Elaim do? For Lama Yumas, why is he going to be killed for this? Mi Yorad L'Soif Daito, do we really know that he's going to do this in the end? People will start murmuring. Maybe things will be different, etc., etc. Al-Kain. The Torah therefore says, Dinoi shall soire umayre, ki hu yisbarach yerid l'soif daitoi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can penetrate the depths of the end of this young man. Umikol mokum, tola hadova b'tnoim harbe. Nonetheless, the Torah wraps up this whole episode with so many conditions. It's not possible really to fulfill all the conditions, and therefore it is never going to happen. There's a very small window, and it's got to eat a huge amount of meat and a large amount of wine in a very small time frame. And there are other conditions, how his beard has got to be. It's so unusual that it's actually not going to happen. He will actually go, feeding his habits, go on this very dangerous pathway. And things will happen, what will happen? Then what will people then say? When he gets up to crazy antics, when he's older, and he's melastem es habrius, and he's standing and he's involved in gangs and who knows what, people will say later, it would have been better had he been killed when he was bekat nusay, before he got into all this stuff. And he wouldn't have got up to this crazy antics. And later people will understand the truth and the foresight of the Torah. That when later people said, the Torah is right, look what happened to this kid. Because people will understand that had the kid died innocent, and then he'll go to Ilm Haba. But now he's caused enormous damage in whatever terrible pathway he's chosen. So what a shame he didn't end up dying innocent. This actually shows the truth of Torah. In other words, says the Chasam Sofer, beautiful. You know what Pshat and Rabbeinu Bachai is? They're not arguing. You're right. No child was ever indeed killed as a ben soira moira. The Tanoim are too complicated. It doesn't happen like the Chasam Sofer said. But Rabbi Yochanan means he sat on the grave of a child who could and should perhaps have been killed as a ben soira moira, but they didn't, because the Tanoim are almost impossible to have, and people will be meranin and cast aspersions on the wisdom of the Torah. And then years later, he actually went down this terrible pathway, caused chaos, and ended up dying, not being killed by Basin as a 13-year-old, but by dying in some street brawl as an 18-year-old in an alleyway somewhere. It says Rabbi Yochanan, I sat on the grave of a child who grew up, and because he continued along his addicted path, and was killed, like I say, not at 13 by Basin, but at 18 in an alleyway. So they're not arguing. So it's true that Ben Soira Meir Elohev Lo Yosid Liyos. It never happened, never will happen. Rabbi Yochanan said, I sat on his grave. I sat on the grave of a child who should have been killed as a Ben Soira Meir, wasn't, because it's impossible to do all the Tanoim. And later, because he was addicted and he sort of continued along his addicted path, then he was killed because of his later on episodes in life. That is his explanation of Rabbeinu Bachai. Okay.
It says, that I saw him.
So what you've got, so the way the Chasam Sofer explains that is,
I'm saying it needs the explanation.
Okay, but that explains, because the questions are strong questions. So what are our questions? Drosh for Kabul Schar is very enigmatic. Number one, why not expand on a mitzvah which has practical application? And two, why have a mitzvah, which exists only for the purpose of exposition? The answer is that it's not just theoretical, because we need to understand that Ben Soramura is the choices you make sometimes as a youngster leads you down a certain pathway which has sometimes very dangerous consequences. So maybe at the very outset it was theoretical, But if you continue on this path of addiction, then who knows where it could lead. So it's and that perhaps explains the machlokas in the Gemara, whether it did or didn't happen. Okay, Beseder, let's carry on. Now, we then have the Parsha, Ki yikach ish isha chadasha lo yetze b'tzavo. We continue with the story of war and the exemption of a person who just gets married. Noki elevesa shana achas v'simach es ishtoi asher lokach. Now, how do you translate that word, v'simach es ishtoi? He rejoices with his wife, or he gladdens his wife? What does it mean exactly? So Rashi says, v'simach yesamach es ishtoi. He should gladden his wife. Not that he sort of has a good time with his wife, but rather he gladdens her. What does that mean? V'targumoi v'yachte yos itisa. He gladdens with his wife. He shall be glad with his wife. Sorry, he should gladden his wife. V'matargim v'yechadei im itise. And if a person translates the words v'yechadei, he shall be glad with his wife, then Toyahu, that's mistaken. She'ein ze targum shel v'somachel ele v'shel somach. Okay, good. What does that mean? As the Seitzei Chom explains, pirush b'chiruk tachas hashin ele v'shel v'somach. And therefore, the translating the words, the pasuk is v'yachte is yotisei, he should gladden his wife, because translating it as v'yechadei, he shall be glad with his wife, is mistaken, because that's the translation of a somach and not of a simach. And the pasuk says v'simach es ishtei. Good. Now, many people, when they learn this Rashi, and I'm sure people who are listening to this will have, oh my gosh, he's talking grammar. This is BH. Brain freeze. I don't do grammatical rushes. End of. But actually, my friend, I saw this in one of his forum or an email that I used to get from years ago. He says something super kishmak. He says, actually, this has a critical limud for shalom bayis. What's pshat? He says there are two ways of looking at v'simach es ishtoi. One is v'somach es ishtoi, which means that a person goes into marriage. I just want to have fun, I want to have a good time, I've got company, and it's all about having fun, and therefore I get a year off from the army and things like that. That's not what it means. The simach means, the yachte yositse, he should make his wife happy. He should look out for her, think about her constantly. He should gladden his wife. In other words, the Torah is teaching us the way to have a happy marriage is, first of all, you make your wife happy. If a person goes into marriage thinking, what's in it for me? How am I going to have a good time? That's a recipe for disaster. But if a person goes into his marriage thinking, how am I going to make her happy? Then that's advice for a good, happy marriage. Rav Twersky, he says something. Rabbi Abraham Twersky says something very interesting. You go to a chasna and you have the Sheva Brachas. You can understand many of the Sheva Brachas relate to marriage, but the first of the Sheva Brachas is Shakol Bar Lechvaydei. What has that got to do with marriage? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything for His honor and glory. What's that got to do with marriage? So Rabbi Twersky, says something very beautiful, that it's setting the tone for the whole marriage. If the focus of a home is Shakol Bar Lechvaydei, that everything is really in this world is to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you're going to have a successful marriage. Because your whole focus is, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from me? He wants me to make this person happy. I will do everything I can to make sure that she's very happy. So therefore, a person goes into marriage with that, you're going to have a successful marriage. But when the focus that's true if the focus is on Hashem's glory, not their own. But if the goal is, what's in it for me, and I want to have a good time, so then there isn't a common goal. But if both husband and wife are trying to do the Ratzon Hashem, they put the concept of Shakol Bar Lechvaydei at the very center of their marriage, then they're going to have a common goal of fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem, they're going to have a great marriage. So really this grammatical Rashi, V'simach es ishtoi, the Targum, the correct translation is V'yachte Yosetsei, he should gladden his wife, goes to the very roots of how one can have good shalom bayis. Okay, let's move on to one final idea. And this is two ideas on one theme, but fabulous ideas. You've got the enigmatic episode of Shiluach HaKan. Shiluach HaKan, sending away the mother bird. The pasuk famously says, "Shalech teshalach esoim," that you have to send away the mother bird. V'sabonim tikach loch, leman yitav loch v'arachta yomim. The famous pasuk. Now, two things. First of all, a story. This story I found out some months ago, and it's a story about Rabbi Dr. Schoenfeld. So I feel quite, although I never met him, I feel connected to him because, after all, he founded Hasmonean, and we have a lot to be grateful for, for his heroic work during the war. In fact, this year was his 40th Yortzeit, so we had various assemblies in school, and his son, Jonathan Schoenfeld, came to school. His grandson, Diane Schoenfeld, came as well, who's named after him, actually. And they spoke, and it also so happens, I'm reading a book, I'm just finishing a book now, about Dr. Judith Grunfeld, right? Do you remember her? So she was worked as like Sora Schneer as number 2 in Krakow in the Beis Yaakov. So it was fascinating hearing like really close-up experiences of that. And also she worked very closely with Dr. Schoenfeld, especially in Sheffield and then later with the Jewish secondary school movement. So he's sort of been a part of my life for the past few months more than normal. And also last week, it was last week, what we do every year, myself and Rabbi Hartman, at the beginning of the school year, we always go to Cheshent and we always visit his keva, we daven by his keva. He's got enormous zuchusim. Anyway, I came across a story which I think is fabulous, and we've had many dignitaries over the last few months coming to Hasmonean, and the portrait of Rabbi Schoenfeld is standing there in the hallway and in various places in the school. And I've told this to various people, and the story is a remarkable story. When I told it to Rabbi Hershel Shechter, he cries. He's a very emotional person. But here, the tears were copious tears. But I told him the following, an amazing thing. And I clarified the details of the story with Jonathan Schoenfeld. In 1938, of course, he's famous for the kinder transport. In the book, by the way, I was never quite sure how many children he saved. But in the book, she says there were 3,400 children. They found out from some files in an attic somewhere. That's 3,400 children between 1938 and 45 or whatever it was. So from them, we've got now great-grandchildren of Schoenfeld, of the children of the kinder transport in school. So from that, so I said this, I mentioned it to the class I said today in school. So I just gave a class to a group of, 30 young ladies in the girls' school. So I said, is anybody here a descendant of someone who was on the kinder transport? There's always going to be someone. And there was, sure enough. So I said to her, who was it? Your great-grandfather. Father's father's father. So how many descendants does your great-grandfather have? So I started listing, well, he has so many children, so many grandchildren, so many great-grandchildren. So I said, fine. So from that, however many there were, imagine all the 3,400. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. It's astonishing. Anyway, so he's got a lot of zuchusim. So one time in 1938, there was a large kinder transport coming from Vienna, and the British were very pedantic and very clear that he could only bring over children if they had a certain square footage for each child. So if they had a home, okay, you've got a room here and a bedroom here and a bedroom there, you've got certain square meters, square footage, and how many kids are you bringing, and does it work out? And that's all the officialdom he had to deal with. He realized at one point that his father died very young when he was 18, Victor Schoenfeld, and he was only 49 years old, I think, and the mother was an almana from a young age, and she was in the main bedroom. Now that's the biggest bedroom. If he could somehow, ask mum to move out, and he was 26 when he did this Hatzalah work. If he could ask, his mother to move out somewhere, he's going to be able to, get a lot more square footage, and he can get more kids. So of course he asked his mother in a gentle, polite way, and she readily agreed. And she went to Bournemouth for a few weeks whilst he brought over more kids and then found them homes, and that's how. So at the time, someone said he was Makayim this pasuk. Why? Shalech teshalach esoim, send away the mother, v'sabonim tikach loch, and you'll get the kids. Okay, Ma'aseh Shahaya. Now, one final thing. This idea, I heard many years ago the following idea. I'll share with you it in a second, and I was never sure where it came from. So at Baruch Hashem, I have a relationship with Daniel Gladstein, the well-known Marbitz Torah. So this is exactly up his street. I knew that he would know. If anyone would know, he would know. So I messaged him, and within a couple of hours, he got the text. He texted me back straight away the Maramokam. So I found the Maramokam. I'm very excited to share it. It's a sefer called the Noam Megodim. The Noam Megodim, he was a Talmud, Eliezer Horowitz. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Melech of Lezhensk, so from one of the early Hasidic masters, and he says something very, very interesting. Look at this. He says, "Val derech zeh," based on this, on the above what he's writing there in Parsha Shlach. Omer b'Parsha Shaleach Teshalach Esoim. Al Pishe Kosu Ki Kol Haguulim Simonim Aleph Mem. Whenever there's a geula, the simon for it is Aleph Mem. For example, b'Mitzrayim, Aaron and Moshe. Aleph is Aaron, Mem is Moshe. In other words, there are 3 times when we needed a geula, and we have to draw on the Simone Gula, Aleph and Mem. The first time was when we were in Golas Mitzrayim. We say, Shaleach Teshalach Es Ho'eim. Send a Aleph Mem. Who is Aleph Mem? Aaron, Moshe. That's the first time. The second time is in the story of Achashverosh, in the Purim story. We needed a Geula. Shaleach Teshalach Es Ho'eim, Aleph Mem, Esther, Mordechai. And then he says, V'Geula Asida B'Meher Yomenu, Aleph Mem is Eliyahu and Mashiach. And V'zehu Remez Shaleach Teshalach Esoim, Eliyahu Mashiach. So it's a very cryptic and enigmatic parsha. What's it all about? The Mekubalim say there's a lot going on over here. But when we say the word Shaleach Teshalach Esoim, please HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends 3 times. The first time was Aaron and Moshe. The second time was Esther and Mordechai. The third time is Mitzvah Hashem, Eliyahu and Mashiach. And then the kids can go free. So it's alluded to in this pasuk, the Aleph Men, the Simone Geula, in this way. Okay, we'll leave it there.